What's good, everybody? You night owls are up way past bedtime, probably starving and raiding the fridge for leftovers. But hold off on that midnight snack. Let's dive into the culinary chaos of World War II instead. Forget tanks, trenches, or victory parades. What did soldiers actually cram into their mouths to survive the end of the world? From American K-rations that tasted like a bad life choice, to German Özat spread that belonged in a war crimes trial, Soviet cabbage slop that could glue posters to walls, and Japanese rice balls that were basically hunger with a side of mindfulness. Tonight, we're cracking open the can of history, one sketchy bite at a time. Before you settle in with your artisanal avocado toast, smash that like button and subscribe, but only if you love me tearing into the past, like a hungry private into a can of Spam. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what unholy hour it is. I'm dying to know who's joining this global mess hall. Now kill the lights, crank the AC for that soothing war room, and let's get cooking. Or at least let's pretend we are. Picture this. Before a single Panzer growled or Spitfire spat fire, every army faced a crisis so dire it made D-Day look like a picnic. Feeding soldiers without poisoning them, yeah, good luck. When you think World War II, your brain goes to heroics, explosions, and grainy newsreels. But let's get real. Did the guy charging Omaha Beach have a full stomach? Or was he running on fumes and a stale cracker? Spoiler, it was the cracker, and it fought back harder than the Nazis. Feeding millions across continents wasn't just a logistical nightmare, it was a full-on food fight with dysentery as the referee. Rations had to be portable, non-perishable, cheap, and ideally not trigger a mutiny. Taste? Ha! That was a pipe dream, ranked somewhere below won't give you scurvy, and rats won't steal it first. Every nation tackled this edible disaster differently. The Americans threw science at it like it was a moon landing, birthing K-rations, little boxes of despair that screamed, "You'll live, but you'll hate it." The Germans started strong with sausage and rye, then slid into canned misery so vile it probably violated the Geneva Convention. The British? They clung to tea like it was the glue of civilization. Spoiler, it was. The Soviets boiled cabbage until it confessed its sins. And the Japanese? They handed out rice balls and a motivational speech about fighting on vibes alone. Food wasn't just fuel, it was a psychological weapon. A hot meal could make you feel human. A cold lump of corned beef could make you question the meaning of life. Soldiers didn't dream of medals. They fantasized about butter, fresh bread, and anything not wrapped in wax paper like a war crime. While generals played Risk in their fancy war rooms, grunts in foxholes were waging their own battles, bartering chocolate for smokes, dodging the guy who farted after eating beans, and praying their rations didn't taste like defeat. Tonight, we're not here for glorious battles or redrawn maps. We're here for Spam, powdered eggs, and the epic showdown between soldiers and the cursed contents of their tin cans. Because if war teaches us anything, it's that everyone's gotta eat, even if the food's plotting a counterattack. All right, you're a US soldier, 1943. You've marched 10 miles, dodged bullets like it's a bad dance routine, and haven't seen a toilet since Roosevelt was a rookie. Your stomach's growling louder than a B-17. What's your reward? The K-ration, the cardboard coffin of culinary cruelty designed by sadists who clearly never tasted their own creation. These bad boys came in 3 flavors of pain: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Each box was the size of a brick and twice as appetizing. Let's unpack the breakfast box. Because nothing says good morning like a can of ham and eggs that's neither ham nor eggs. Imagine Spam getting frisky with sawdust, then canned for your displeasure. Pair it with crackers so hard they could deflect shrapnel, instant coffee that tasted like burnt regret, and powdered lemonade that was basically lemon-scented betrayal. Oh, and the kicker? 4 cigarettes, 2 sticks of gum, and 1 sheet of toilet paper. 1. Choose wisely. Soldier, wipe, or write your will, but you can't do both. Lunch? Don't get your hopes up. You're getting cheese spread that's more chemical than dairy, another stack of jaw-breaking biscuits, and a chocolate bar so dense it could sink a U-boat. No spoon? No problem. Dig in with your bayonet, a twig, or the sheer force of your disappointment. Dinner's the grand finale. Meat and beans. which looks like something a dog left behind and smells like a war crime. More crackers, more gum, and if the ration gods are feeling generous, a fruit bar that tastes like someone cursed an apple and called it a day. These K-rations weren't just food, they were a test of will. Every bite was a reminder. You're fighting for freedom, but first you're fighting this. So here's to the soldiers who choked down their rations, swapped their smokes, and dreamed of a world where food didn't come with a side of existential dread. Because in the end, the real heroes of World War II weren't just the ones who stormed the beaches. They were the ones who survived the mess hall. Look, K-rations were nutritional miracles. If your definition of miracle is cramming 3,000 calories of misery into a box that tasted like a war crime, packed with protein, fat, sugar, and just enough flavor to remind you life could be worse, these things were the edible equivalent of a motivational poster. You'll survive, but you'll hate every second. Soldiers traded their ration bits like inmates in a prison yard. Cigarettes for chocolate, cheese for crackers, anything to avoid that cursed ham and egg abomination. But then, like a gift from the heavens, you'd find a Hershey bar. Real chocolate, real comfort. For one glorious bite, you weren't knee-deep in mud. You were back home, probably stealing cookies from Mom's jar. That single moment made choking down the rest of the K-ration's cardboard nightmare almost worth it. Sure, it was dry, square, and tasted like trench foot, but it fueled the Allies to victory, one questionable meat blob at a time. If K-rations were the Army's idea of a meal, the D-ration was their sick joke masquerading as dessert. It looked like a chocolate bar, wrapped like a chocolate bar, and was handed out like a chocolate bar. But don't be fooled. This was no Hershey's Hug. This was Satan's candy bar, designed to crush souls and molars alike. The D-ration was a Pentagon pet project with 3 goals. Don't melt, last until the apocalypse, and taste like existential dread. Picture a brown brick the size of a deck of cards, dense enough to double as a grenade. Soldiers swore it could stop bullets, either in their packs or their intestines. Ingredients? Technically food. Chocolate, sugar, oat flour, and a whisper of cocoa fat. The result? A slab so tough it could have been used to fortify bunkers. Why was it so vile? Because the Army demanded it survive jungles, deserts, and Arctic hellscapes without turning to sludge. Oh, and they insisted it taste awful, so soldiers wouldn't scarf it unless they were literally starving. Congrats, mission accomplished. Biting it raw was a dental death wish. Think cracked teeth and instant regret. Some tried grating it into hot water for hot chocolate. Others just stared at it, wondering if they'd sinned in a past life. Legend has it a few used it to hammer tent pegs or fend off wolves. Still, it packs 600 calories per bar, enough to keep you alive through a day of dodging bullets, if not your crushing disappointment. Stuck behind enemy lines with nothing but your rifle and terrible choices? The D-ration might save you. Your will to live, though, not a chance. The Army eventually realized feeding troops chocolate-flavored masonry wasn't a morale booster, so later versions got slightly softer and marginally less tragic with the original. Soldiers remembered it like a bad experience, painful, unforgettable, and best left in the past. If K-rations were survival chow and D-rations were edible war crimes, field kitchens were a soldier's only shot at food that didn't make them question their enlistment. These rolling misery wagons, think food trucks run by angry drill sergeants, chugged behind trucks or horses, churning out vats of stew, beans, and something vaguely resembling gravy. It wasn't Michelin star dining, but it was hot, not canned, and only mildly soul-destroying. You'd line up with your beat-up mess kit, a metal tray that looked like it belonged in a mad scientist's lab, shuffling forward, praying the guy in front didn't hog the last scoop of meat surprise. The cook slung food with the precision of a sniper. One ladle, one glare. Next. The menu depended on your war zone. In Europe, you might score cream-chipped beef on toast, lovingly dubbed SOS. And yes, they meant it. In the Pacific, rice with hot dog shrapnel floating in mystery broth. If you were lucky, coffee, though, was the real MVP. Bitter, black, and brewed in vats big enough to drown a platoon. Soldiers chugged it hot, cold, or with powdered milk that tasted like chalk. It kept them awake, angry, and ready to fight, or at least complain loudly. The best part of the field kitchen, the smell. It screamed, "Food's coming!" The worst, everything else. You ate in rain, snow, or mud so thick it had its own zip code, perched on rocks or your own helmet. Forks? Ha! Ambiance. Just you, your soggy boots, and beans older than your grandma. Still, when it was hot and semi-chewable, field kitchen grub felt like a hug from a grizzled ant. In a world of bullets and K-rations, it was the closest thing to comfort food. Proof you were still human, at least until the next can of Spam. At the start of World War II, German soldiers strutted into battle with crisp uniforms, cocky attitudes, and, get this, actual food that didn't make them gag. Early Wehrmacht rations were the culinary equivalent of a Michelin star compared to the Allies' cardboard cuisine. Picture this: rye bread, sausages, butter cheese, canned meats, marmalade, and coffee. Well, coffee, more on that Zet's garbage later because it deserves its own hate mail. Each soldier lugged enough chow for a couple of days, which sounded great until you added rifles, grenades, and the crushing weight of Hitler's ego. Still, the Germans were all about 3 hot meals a day, with field kitchens trailing like overworked hipster food trucks. Breakfast? Dark rye slathered with jam or butter, washed down with acorn-flavored coffee that tasted like brewed regret. Lunch? Tinned meat, cheese, and maybe a boiled potato or 3 if you weren't dodging shells. Dinner? If the enemy wasn't lobbing mortars, you might score soup or stew made from whatever hadn't run away that morning. Sausage was the star. Metwurst and Leberwurst, packed with protein and just enough spice to mask the Trent stench. But in a sealed tin, your foxhole smelled like a mix of sweat, iron, and a pork-scented candle gone wrong. And the bread, oh, the bread. Real hearty rye that soldiers missed more than their own beds. One Wehrmacht vet called it the only soft thing in a war full of sharp edges. That's not a ration, that's poetry wrapped in carbs. German field kitchens were the MVP, dishing out steaming vats of stew, boiled meats, and dumplings like a wartime soup kitchen on steroids. Morale was sky high, bellies were mostly full, and the Wehrmacht's efficiency seemed like it could conquer the world. But, oh, there's always a but. Bigger than a Panzer, this sausage-fueled golden age was doomed. As the war dragged on and supply lines stretched thinner than a soldier's patience, the sausages turned sketchy, the bread went stale, and those proud field kitchens were left stranded in frozen forests, serving up nothing but frost-bitten potatoes and delusional dreams of victory. For a fleeting, bratwurst-blessed moment, German soldiers had it all: warm food, semi-decent coffee substitutes, and the naive hope this whole mess would wrap up by Christmas. But as Hitler's blitzkrieg fantasies morphed into a logistical dumpster fire, German rations took a nosedive into the abyss of pot of fancy, German word for "this ain't food but good luck." By 1942, the menu got creative. Real coffee? Gone. Say hello to Özat's Cafe, a soul-crushing brew of roasted acorns, chicory, sugar beets, or barley that smelled like defeat and tasted like someone boiled a gym sock. It was coffee the way a cardboard box is a house, technically there, but nobody's happy about it. Bread, once the hearty hug of rye, became a war crime of sawdust, straw flour, and potato starch. You could call it bread, but your teeth would file for divorce. Soldiers swore it doubled as a helmet cushion or a blunt weapon. Butter vanished. In its place came Özat's margarine, a greasy, chalky sludge that was somehow worse than nothing. Meat? A distant memory. Cans of meat products started showing up with labels so vague they could have contained regret or roadkill. No one dared ask. Even sausages, the sacred heart of German cuisine, got defiled. Horse meat sneaked in, then turnip filler, until some brats were 40% plant matter. Imagine chomping into a wurst and tasting soggy newspaper. Guten Appetit, Reich style. The real crime wasn't just the taste, it was the betrayal. These Özat rations were nutritional ghosts, low on calories, nutrients, and hope. Troops on the Eastern Front were burning thousands of calories in Arctic hell, only to be fed slop that wouldn't keep a hamster alive. Starvation, sickness, and existential crises followed. Soldiers got desperate, boiling shoe leather, bartering with locals, or raiding enemy stashes for anything edible. One American chocolate bar was worth more than a loaf of Wehrmacht bread. What started as a well-fed war machine was now running on cabbage juice and lies. The Germans kicked off with real food. Now they were chewing misery and chasing it with root-flavored despair. If there was a graveyard for cuisine, it was the Eastern Front, a frozen, miserable stretch from Berlin to Russia's icy core, where logistics were like running a food truck during an alien invasion while wolves circled. German soldiers, once spoiled with sausage and rye, were now hunched in snowdrifts, fingers numb, stomachs screaming louder than the artillery. Rations dwindled, supply lines collapsed, and morale melted faster than a popsicle in a flamethrower. The main course? Soup. If you were lucky, it was hot water with a potato peel cameo. Unlucky? Just frozen water, solid as a brick by the time it reached you. Bread? Moldy, missing, or mythical. Meat? A fever dream. Canned meat products might have been beef, pork, or the chef's broken promises. Labels were long gone, so you sniffed and prayed. In winter, soldiers burned their last firewood not for warmth but to thaw mystery tins over engine blocks. Some ate snow out of desperation, which sounds poetic until you realize it's a one-way ticket to hypothermia with a side of slush. Then there were the rats, fat, sassy, and eating better than anyone. Some units cooked them, others saw them as competition, fighting midnight turf wars over crumbs. Bartering became high art. Cigarettes for bread, buttons for sugar, or socks for half a potato. A spoonful of jam could spark a brawl. Chocolate? You were basically a warlord. Every mealtime was a grim ritual. Unwrap the tin, whisper a prayer, and hope it didn't growl back. On the Eastern Front, food wasn't just scarce. It was a sadistic game of survival, played one frozen spoonful at a time. If Germans were eating despair, Soviet soldiers were chowing down on sheer stubbornness. The Red Army's food philosophy? If it fills a hole and doesn't kill you instantly, it's gourmet. Official rations: black bread, cabbage soup, buckwheat porridge, maybe some boiled spuds, dried fish, and tea that was just melted snow with a twig for vibes. Meat? On paper, sure. In reality, rarer than a sunny day in Stalingrad. When it showed up, it was salted into jaw-breaking jerky. Chewing it was a workout, but licking the fat off empty tins felt like a Michelin star treat. The bread was the star, a coarse, black lump of whatever grain hadn't been confiscated. Rationed to a palm-sized chunk, it vanished in 2 bites, unless you savored it like a wartime lollipop, licking it slowly while crying. Cabbage was the unsung hero, stuffed, shredded, fermented, or boiled into every pot. So much cabbage, soldiers swore they smelled it in their nightmares, and dreamed of defecting to the turnip army. Still hungry? Congrats! You're now a Soviet soldier. Rations were supposed to come daily, but in war-torn zones, daily meant whenever the truck doesn't explode. So they got creative. Foraging was a lifestyle. Digging up frozen potatoes, shooting stray animals, or trading boots for a single boiled egg. Hunger was their real commander, and every meal was a battle against the odds. Sometimes Soviet soldiers even cut deals with German POWs. Food for silence, a black market buffet of betrayal. And yet, through sheer cabbage-pounded grit they endued, malnourished, exhausted, but stubborn as a mule with a vendetta. The Red Army didn't march on calories. They marched on spite and boiled greens, proving you don't need food to win a war, just a stomach of steel and a grudge. When rations ran dry, which was basically a Tuesday, Soviet soldiers didn't just starve quietly. They turned desperation into a culinary X Games, adapting with the chaotic energy of a raccoon in a dumpster. Imagine, you're outside Leningrad, no supply truck in sight, your cabbage soup is just water with a leaf doing a sad cameo, and your last black bread has grown a hipster beard. What's the move? Option 1, forage like a feral gourmet. Soldiers scoured the countryside for anything vaguely edible. Berries, tree bark, boiled grass, dandelions, or flower bulbs that tasted like dirt's evil cousin. One genius unit roasted shoe leather, Not for flavor, spoiler, there was none, but because it was technically organic. Option 2. Barter like a wartime Wall Street bro. A pair of socks could snag a potato, a broken watch might score a spoonful of lard, tobacco was cash, soap was Bitcoin, and a tin of meat made you a mob boss who could demand someone shine your boots and write your mom a letter. Option 3. Unauthorized logistics, aka stealing with extra steps. Red Army troops raided abandoned German outposts for loot, and one veteran described finding a box of Wehrmacht sausages as the first time I cried and drooled simultaneously. Field kitchens, when they weren't AWOL, were mystery meal wizards, tossing in beets, onions, 1913 pickles, and meat that could have been anything from pork to a lost bet. The result? A red, chewy slop that kept you alive, mostly. So why didn't morale tank? Because Soviet culture turned suffering into a flex. Starvation was a badge of honor, and soldiers leaned in hard, cracking jokes about their rations, serenading dried fish, and naming their tin cups like they were pets or fever dream therapists. Mealtime wasn't about taste, it was survival theater. Every spoonful of boars to middle finger to the universe, screaming, "We're still here." If World War II had a culinary Olympics, the British Army would have surrendered to its own menu and called it a day. British soldiers didn't eat. They endured a daily gauntlet of flavorless punishment, fueled by blind optimism and enough tea to drown a battleship. Their rations were a war within a war, and the enemy was their own mess tin. Meet the Holy Trinity: tea, hardtack biscuits, and bully beef. Tea wasn't just a drink, it was liquid patriotism. Soldiers brewed it in mugs, mess tins, helmets, anything that could hold heat and not leak. Much. No milk? No sugar? No problem. Just hot brown water and the faint hope of surviving the day. Hardtack biscuits were built to outlast the British Empire, dense as bricks and tasteless as bureaucracy. They doubled as coasters, plates, or emergency armor. Many soldiers blamed their dental bills on these jawbreakers, not shrapnel. Then there's bully beef, the tin corned beef that looked like cat food's sad cousin and felt like chewing regret. Salty, oily, and versatile, you could slice it, fry it, or just glare at it until your hunger gave up. The rest of the ration? Powdered eggs that tasted like lies, tin jam sticky enough to trap a tank, and oatmeal, chocolate, or dried fruit, all locked in tins that required a crowbar, a prayer, and a grudge to open. Field kitchens occasionally churned out stews, prunes, or, miracle of miracles, a real egg, or a slice of bread that didn't taste like defeat. But the British Army didn't pretend their food was good, they just shrugged and said, "It'll keep you alive, mate." And it did. Barely. No matter how grim the meal, tea was the constant. Bombs could fall, trucks could explode, but if there was hot water, there was a brew. And in that muddy trench, it was Britain's secret weapon. Stubbornness in a cup. By mid-war, British soldiers weren't just fighting the Axis. They were battling ration fatigue, a sneaky foe disguised as yet another tin of corned beef. The supply system was a patchwork of hope, string, and paperwork, so excessive it probably needed its own general. Fighting across North Africa, Italy, or Burma's jungles meant rations got weirder the farther you were from London. Often colder, squishier, and late. A ration in Cairo might arrive edible, maybe even warm. In Burma, think moldy, ant-ravaged, and 2 weeks overdue. Yet soldiers saluted, heated, and ate it because that's British resilience, chewing through despair with a stiff upper lip. Water was always boiled, not just for safety, but because boiling meant tea. Men would dodge bullets to save a kettle. A warm cup was the line between sanity and sobbing into your soggy socks. When supplies ran low, soldiers got crafty. They turned powdered milk into tea whitener, spread jam on hardtack with a bayonet, and seasoned bully beef with sarcasm. One legend reportedly whipped up a stew from corned beef, raisins, and crushed vitamin tablets. Technically food, legally a war crime. Tinned rations were a blessing, they lasted forever, and a curse, they fought back. Soldiers had heated debates over tin designs, praising the good key-roll ones and cursing the handleless devil tins that mocked their hunger. When something fresh, like an egg, a loaf of bread, or a vegetable that wasn't a war crime, showed up, it was either party time or a full-blown conspiracy. One soldier got a fresh tomato and stared at it for an hour, debating whether to eat it or adopt it as a pet named Trevor. Despite the ration-induced jaw pain, blandness, and biscuits that could double as artillery, British troops kept their chins up. They grumbled with the elegance of a Shakespearean monologue, cracked jokes about their rebellious digestive systems, and carried on with a cup of tea and a smirk, because that's just how you win a war, one sarcastic sip at a time. If American soldiers had K-rations, Germans had logistics, and Brits had tea. Japanese soldiers had rice and a PhD in suffering. The Imperial Japanese Army didn't just embrace endurance, they made it their brand. Hunger wasn't a problem, it was a duty. Starving? Noble. Barefoot? Heroic. Eating weevils? Extra protein, soldier. Their rations weren't meals, they were polite suggestions to maybe not die yet. Standard pack? White rice, barley dried fish, pickled plums, umeboshi, for that extra pucker, soy sauce concentrate, and if the gods were feeling generous, a few hard candies that tasted like regret. It was compact, culturally on brand, and about as filling as a motivational poster. Troops started with multi-day rations in wax paper or bento-style tins. Looking all tidy and Instagram-ready, then they hit the jungle. In places like New Guinea, Burma, or Guadalcanal, the humidity turned rice into a moldy science experiment. Rats treated supplies like an all-you-can-eat buffet, and dried fish went rancid faster than Japan's war plans. To top it off, Japan's logistics were a hot mess. Supply lines were stretched, bombed, blockaded, or just forgot to show up. Units went days, sometimes weeks, splitting a handful of rice like it was the last slice of pizza at a frat party. So they foraged, or tried to. Jungle plants ranged from kinda edible to enjoy your hallucinations and death. Lizards, insects, and rats became fine dining, if you could catch them. One soldier bragged about a soup made from boiled grass and boot leather, which sounds like a Yelp review for I hate myself. Japanese troops didn't complain though. Hardship was their badge of honor. Starving? Glorious. Rice full of bugs? Crunchy bonus. Occasionally, a dab of miso paste or powdered green tea appeared, hoarded like pirate treasure. A teaspoon of tea could spark joy. A pinch of salt could bring grown men to tears. But calories were scarce, suffering was plentiful, and morale came from cultural discipline, not whatever passed for lunch. Japanese soldiers weren't just underfed. They were trained to high-five their hunger and keep marching. The Pacific jungles looked like a postcard from paradise, until you noticed the leeches, disease, and the stench of slow death. For Japanese soldiers, the jungle wasn't a grocery store, it was a green death trap with a superiority complex. Supply lines? More like supply lies. Tropical storms, naval blockades, and enemy ambushes turned every rice delivery into a miracle on par with parting the Red Sea. When food didn't arrive, the jungle laughed in your face. Plants that looked tasty were often nature's way of saying, "Psych!" Animals were too fast, and insects weren't just inedible, they were out for blood. Rations spoiled faster than you could say sushi, cans rusted shut, and rice grew mold like it was auditioning for a horror flick. One Guadalcanal soldier wrote, "Everything's wet. My boots, my gun, my dreams, my appetite." On a good day, you might boil some roots, snag a wild fruit, or catch a frog or jungle fowl, if you were Usain Bolt, with a net. Bad day, tree bark, shoe leather, or rotting palm stems washed down with desperation's flavored water. Some soldiers boiled the same handful of rice 3 times, squeezing every last speck of hope from it. Others fermented leftovers into jungle glue, a starchy porridge that was half food, half cry for help. Then there were the grim rumors, whispers of cannibalism among starving units during sieges. It wasn't common, but it happened, a dark footnote that rips the Hollywood glow off the Pacific theater. Men, pushed to the brink by war and empty stomachs, did the unthinkable. If that doesn't kill the romance of jungle warfare, nothing will. Starvation wasn't the only enemy. Malaria, dysentery, and dengue fever piled on, fueled by malnutrition. Soldiers didn't just fall to bullets, they crumbled from hunger and infection, slow and silent. The jungle didn't care if you were Axis or allies. It didn't feed you, it just watched, smirked, and handed you another leech. The jungle didn't just starve you, it waited for you to give up, then served you to the leeches with a side of malaria. War might level cities, but it also unleashes the unhinged culinary genius of desperate soldiers armed with bayonets and a single can of Spam. Across every front, rations weren't just eaten, they were negotiated, like a high-stakes poker game where the chips were sadness and the pot was survival. Soldiers bartered, swapped, stretched, fried, and occasionally prayed over the least offensive bits. Food wasn't just fuel, it was entertainment, therapy, and a DIY chemistry experiment gone wrong. American GIs in foxholes turned K-ration crackers into pancakes by mixing them with powdered eggs and coffee creamer, then frying the mess over a fire. The result? Warm despair. Think sadness, but toasty. Canned cheese got melted into a greasy goo for trench fondue, and Spam was sliced, fried, and wedged between biscuits for the world's most depressing burger. Even chewing gum pulled double duty, patching leaky canteens or bribing the guy hoarding an extra smoke. British troops, armed with their apocalyptic hardtack and cursed jam, invented jam buddy sandwiches by smashing biscuits together until either the jam won or their teeth surrendered. One North African squad mixed bully beef with dried fruit for dirt delight, which sounds like a cocktail but tasted like regret. Another crew dubbed their nightly stew stuff because even the cook had no clue what was in it. Possibly soup, possibly war crimes. On the Eastern Front, Soviet soldiers used empty shell casings as soup pots, boiled cabbage in helmets, and roasted anything with legs, including a stolen German sausage that needed a 3-man guard to keep it safe. Meanwhile, Japanese troops, scraping by on next to nothing, refried rice with pickled veggies for onigiri-style cakes, and hoarded dried seaweed to flavor their sadness-flavored water. These weren't meals, they were wartime witchcraft, turning scraps into something that wouldn't make you cry much. Field improvisation wasn't just cooking. It was a morale lifeline. It took not enough and made it this'll do, transforming inedible garbage into slightly less terrifying garbage. Your mess kit was your Michelin star kitchen. Your bayonet was your spatula. And every meal was a miracle that screamed, "You're still alive, suckers!" Long after the guns went quiet, uniforms were mothballed and medals gathered dust. One thing haunted World War II veterans: the food. Not just the taste, or lack thereof, but the memories baked into every bite. Rations weren't just sustenance, they were the soundtrack to trauma, laughter, loss, and the faint hope of not dying today. A nibble of bully beef could teleport you to a French foxhole. A whiff of cabbage soup yanked you back to Stalingrad's frozen hell. A can of Spam wasn't meat, it was a time machine. Veterans spun tales with gallows humor. American GIs joked about wrestling D rations like they were unpaid debts. British soldiers laughed about trying to trade hardtack with locals, only to be met with pitying stares. One Soviet vet swore off bread post-war, not from hate, but because it felt like desecrating a holy relic. Food drew the lines of war. A fresh apple meant you were near a farm, maybe even peace. The hot field kitchen stew meant you'd live another day. Even bad coffee meant someone cared enough to boil water. Then there were care packages. Glorious lifelines from home. Chocolate bars, dried fruit, powdered milk, and notes tucked next to cookies that smelled like love. These weren't snacks. They were emotional CPR. Some hoarded them like dragons. Others shared like saints. A few rationed them bite by bite, stretching hope through weeks of hell. But some tastes lingered too long. Vets swore they could still taste tin decades later. One GI claimed rain smelled like Spam. Another said powdered eggs starred in his nightmares, cackling like culinary demons. In war, eating wasn't just about feeding your body, it was about anchoring your soul. Every bite, no matter how vile, was a stake in the ground. I'm still human, world's gone mad, but I'm still here. So next time you nuke a hot pocket, spare a thought for the soldiers cooking with firewood, bayonets, and sheer spite. For them, every meal was survival. And the taste? It's still out there, haunting their dreams. The ink was barely dry on the U.S. Constitution when America tripped into its first major drama. And it wasn't redcoats or rogue senators, but the far mightier foe, whiskey. In the early 1790s, the new nation was broke as a bad joke, drowning in Revolutionary War debt. President George Washington and his fiscal wizard, Alexander Hamilton, needed a plan, and Hamilton, with his big brain and bigger wig, cooked up a doozy, an excise tax on homemade hooch, aka whiskey. To city slickers and coastal fat cats, it sounded like a sensible cash grab. But out west, in places like western Pennsylvania, it was a powdered wig slapped to the face. Whiskey wasn't just a drink on the frontier, it was money. Farmers turned surplus grain into liquor because it was easier to haul, didn't spoil, and was worth more than a wheelbarrow of corn. Bartering whiskey for goods was as normal as breathing, so when the feds taxed it, frontiersmen didn't see a revenue plan. They saw a middle finger from the same snooty elites they'd just yeeted in the Revolution. To make it sting worse, the tax was rigged to screw the little guy. Big distilleries paid a flat fee, but small-time Appalachian moonshiners got hit per gallon, meaning they paid more relative to their measly output. Add federal tax collectors riding in like budget bounty hunters, and the frontier was ready to explode. At first, the pushback was petty, think sassy letters and some light tax dodging. But it was about to get a whole lot rowdier. Things got spicy fast. Tax inspectors were threatened, paperwork went up in flames, and revenue officers were kindly invited to take a hike, sometimes at pitchfork point. But polite didn't last. The frontier brought back tar and feather chic, chased taxmen out of town, and in one glorious moment, stripped a revenue officer naked, tied him to a tree, and gave him a free haircut. Call it moonshine justice, half vengeance, half barbershop gone rogue. George Washington, sipping tea in his presidential wig, was watching this backwoods circus with growing side-eye. What started as a tax protest was snowballing into a full-on rebellion, and it was about to test the Constitution's spine and Washington's patience. By 1792, the whiskey tax wasn't just unpopular, it was a glowing, radioactive dumpster fire. In the wilds of Pennsylvania, Kentucky, and Virginia, grumbling turned into organized chaos. Tax collectors learned two sounds by heart, the smash of their windows and the ping of bullets zipping overhead. Western Pennsylvania became the rebellion's HQ, a hotbed of defiance where taverns doubled as war rooms. Picture kegs of homemade whiskey parked proudly next to muskets, as locals plotted like they were auditioning for the next American Revolution. These weren't just drunken rants. Oh no, this was coordinated. Militias formed, threats flew, and they even passed their own screw-the-tax resolutions. Some refused to deal with anyone who paid it, turning the frontier into a mix of protest mafia and moonshine-fueled book club. By 1793, it got uglier. Tax collectors and their fanboys were ambushed, whipped, or paraded through town with signs like "coward" hung around their necks. Think Boston Tea Party, but with worse breath than a whiskey chaser. The feds tried serving court summons, but good luck delivering legal papers when the local sheriffs, probably in the mob. The region was sliding into lawless chaos, with officials either winking at the rebels or secretly passing them ammo. Washington, usually cooler than a winter at Valley Forge, started grinding his wooden teeth. The Whiskey Rebellion wasn't just a tax dodge. It was a middle finger to the Constitution itself. If the government couldn't collect its dues, what was the point of all that fancy parchment? Washington tried diplomacy, sending commissioners to talk sense into the rebels. Spoiler, it was like offering tea at a bar brawl. The rebels were too busy forming committees, holding conventions, and whispering about secession to care. They didn't see themselves as crooks, but as patriots fighting big-wig tyranny too. Meanwhile, Hamilton, the hawk in a cravat, was in Washington's ear like, "You gonna let these hillbillies trash our Constitution after we just fought a whole war for it? Really?" So Washington dropped the mic. In a move that shocked the rebels and made history, he decided to raise a federal army against his own people. By 1794, the Whiskey Rebellion wasn't just a backwoods hissy fit. It was a full-on dare to Uncle Sam. George Washington, the guy who yeeted the British a decade ago, now found himself leading an army against Americans, his own freshly liberated fan base. This wasn't some scrappy militia either. Washington summoned over 12,000 troops, 3 times his crew, at the Battle of Trenton, pulling in state militias from Maryland, New Jersey, Virginia, and even Pennsylvania. Some were volunteers, others were voluntold. It was the biggest federal flex in U.S. history. And it wasn't aimed at redcoats or pirates, but at angry farmers with pitchforks and stills. Hamilton, never one to skip a drama, saddled up like a powdered wig General Patton, grinning like this was his Super Bowl. Washington, less thrilled but all business, knew the stakes. This wasn't just about booze, it was about whether the U.S. could function as a real country. If rebels could scare off taxmen and flip off Congress without a slap, the Constitution might as well be kindling for their moonshine fires. So, for the first and only time, a sitting president led troops into the field. Picture it. America's VIP, astride a horse, marching through the Allegheny Mountains. Not to start a revolution, but to squash one. It was less, give me liberty, and more, give me your taxes, or else. When this mega army rolled into rebel country, the response was anticlimactic. The whiskey warriors, who'd been talking smack in taverns and torching taxmen's sheds, suddenly had urgent laundry to do. Ringleaders vanished into the woods, pulling the classic, I know nothing defense. No epic battle, no Alamo-style showdown, just a rebellion that fizzled like a soggy firecracker. But Washington's point was crystal clear. The federal government wasn't here to play. With the rebellion snuffed out before a single rebel shot was fired, the army turned around, probably annoyed they'd marched all that way for nothing. Washington headed home, ready to get back to his dentures in Mount Vernon. But the party wasn't over. Time for arrests, trials, and justice federal style. A few rebel bigwigs got nabbed, and the frontier learned the hard way, you don't mess with Uncle Sam's wallet. The rebel big shots? Poof. Most vanished into the wilderness like moonshine-fueled Houdinis. What got dragged to Philadelphia were a few unlucky saps caught by bad timing or worse, hiding spots. 20 faced trial for treason, but Hamilton's dreams of a dramatic courtroom showdown fizzled. Evidence was shakier than a still on a bumpy road. Local Pennsylvanians weren't exactly itching to hang their drinking buddies. Only 2 got slapped with treason convictions, and even those felt like the jury was just humoring the feds. These weren't evil masterminds, they were broke farmers who'd made epically bad calls. Washington, who'd led his own rebellion back in the day, wasn't about to go full dictator. In a plot twist that left jaws on the floor, he pardoned both. The message? The government's got the muscle to enforce the law, but it's not here to play King George cosplay. Mercy was as much a flex as the army. Washington nailed the balance of strength and restraint, proving the feds could uphold the law without turning into a monarchy that yeets peasants for fun. Hamilton, though, he was sulking in his wig, itching for more heads to roll, figuratively, mostly. He thought the rabble needed a firmer leash, especially when whiskey was in the mix. But Washington played the long game. Legitimacy came from showing the Republic could be tough and fair, not just a skull-cracking machine. The whiskey rebellion was done, but its vibes echoed like a bad hangover. The U.S. passed its first federal authority stress test without imploding, but it left big questions. Would future presidents flex this hard? Would mercy always follow the muscle? And was this the end of frontier tantrums, or just the trailer for more? The guns were holstered, the rebels pardoned, and the stills bubbled quietly in the hills, again. Politically, though, the rebellion left a mess stickier than spilled moonshine. It proved the feds could enforce their rules, but it also lit a fuse under the political fault lines already cracking America apart. 2 visions of the country were slugging it out. Hamilton's Federalists, with their love of order, commerce, and wigs sturdy enough to deflect musket balls, saw the rebellion as proof the backwoods needed a tight leash. On the other side, Jefferson's Republicans sniffed tyranny in every taxman's shadow, championing the yeoman farmer and local control. To the Republicans, sending 12,000 troops to squash some whiskey-soaked farmers wasn't law enforcement. It was overkill, like nuking a mosquito. Thomas Jefferson, chilling as VP, didn't mince words, privately of course. He called the whole march a monarchical adventure, muttering that Washington's army stunt was pushing honest folks away from the government and straight into his anti-Fed fan club. And wouldn't you know it, he was onto something. Post-rebellion, the Republican Party started gaining steam, especially out west, where distrust of the feds was brewed stronger than the local hooch. These weren't just drunk farmers anymore, they were voters, pissed about being treated like tax-dodging bandits for a levy they could barely scrape together. The rebellion flopped militarily, but scored big in the group chat of anti-federalist rage. It supercharged America's first real political parties, sharpening the divide between Team Strong central government and Team States' Rights or Bust. No shots were fired, but a new war kicked off. One fought with ballots, stump speeches, and spicy op-eds. At its core, the Whiskey Rebellion wasn't just about booze. It was about power, class, and a whole lot of resentment. To small farmers, the whiskey tax wasn't just a bill. It was a glowing neon sign that the new government was run by elites, for elites, at the expense of the dirt-under-their-nails crowd. Most rebels weren't outlaws. They were Revolutionary War vets who dodged British bullets for liberty, only to come home and get nickel and dimed by the republic they helped birth. It was like slaying a dragon just to get mugged by the village cat. Worse, frontier folks felt politically invisible. Representation was skewed toward rich city types who wouldn't know a plow from a powder horn. Their voices were drowned out by East Coast bankers and merchants who thought rural was a personality flaw. The tax, hitting small distillers harder than big players, didn't smell like policy. It reeked of class warfare with a whiskey aftertaste. And don't get me started on enforcement. Wealthy distillers could lawyer up and pay a flat fee, while small-timers were stuck bleeding gallons of cash they didn't have. The poor sap with one rickety still and 6 barrels of mash, he got a federal marshal knocking and a one-way ticket to potential jail town. The optics were atrocious, like kicking a puppy while wearing a top hat. The Whiskey Rebellion was a screaming neon warning. Class tension wasn't going anywhere just because America had a shiny new constitution. The fight between fancy urban power hubs and gritty rural folk was baked into the nation's DNA, and this was just the first boozy slice of that bitter pie. Some of the rowdier rebels even cribbed lines from the French Revolution, tossing around liberty, tyranny, and rights of man like they were auditioning for a guillotine cameo. To Washington and Hamilton, this was nightmare fuel. Nobody wanted a Parisian bloodbath crashing the Ohio Valley. But to the whiskey rebels, those words weren't scary. They were a broken promise, a reminder that the revolution they'd fought for was starting to feel like a bait and switch. Washington's choice to personally lead troops into Pennsylvania was ballsy, risky, and a total glow-up from the ceremonial figurehead vibe most folks expected of a president. Back then, the presidency was seen as a chill gig. Sign some papers, look dignified, don't trip over your wig. But Washington? He strapped on his boots and said, "Hold, my Mount Vernon ale, I'm enforcing the law." The Whiskey Rebellion wasn't just a tax spat. It was a make-or-break moment for the Constitution he'd helped birth. If he let a bunch of moonshine maniacs bully the law into submission, the whole United States experiment could unravel faster than a bad knitting project. 13 states might decide to go full every man for himself and yeet the Union. In that light, the rebellion wasn't just a drunken tantrum. It was a canary choking in the democracy coal mine. Washington's presence turned the stakes mythical. The man was a walking legend, father of the country, hero of the revolution, the guy who could probably stare down a bear and win. When word spread that Washington himself was riding west, rebels scattered like roaches when the lights flipped on. Some couldn't believe it. Their liberty icon was now marching to bust their stills over whiskey? But the gamble worked like a charm. Washington didn't fire a shot, just showed up, flexed his aura, and order was restored. Then he knew when to quit. No occupation, no mass arrests, no reality TV Strobel show trials. He just gave a stern, the law ain't optional glare and bounced. Not everyone was clapping, though. Jefferson's crew cried foul, accusing Washington of swinging military muscle to squash legit gripes. They called it a dictator dress rehearsal. Even some Federalists whispered, did we just greenlight presidents going full warlord? Still, the rebellion's quick collapse let Washington exit his presidency like a rock star. He'd enforced the law without turning into a tyrant, shown strength without going full off with their heads. But in private, he knew this wasn't the last time America's unity would get stress tested. And next time, it might not be such a bloodless mic drop. The Whiskey Rebellion ended with a whimper, but its echoes hit like a banjo solo, politically, legally, culturally. This dusty brawl over corn juice was one of the Constitution's first big stress tests, and it passed with flying colors. It proved the feds could enforce laws, even when faced with pitchforks and liquid courage. Before this, the Constitution was just a fancy theory. The Articles of Confederation had already shown how a spineless government could flop. Now with Washington's boots on the ground, it had some serious biceps. But with that flex came a shadow. Rural folks started seeing the feds not as their pals, but as snooty East Coast elites who wouldn't know a plow from a powdered wig. The same folks who'd cheered the revolution now grumbled about Philly and New York pulling a London too. Culturally, the rebellion became Appalachian folklore. Tales of plucky distillers sticking it to the man got passed down, some exaggerated, some straight-up fan fiction, but all with the same vibe. The government's not your buddy, so grab a still, a rifle, and some rowdy neighbors. In the shiny new capital of Washington, D.C., still being sketched out during the rebellion's aftermath, lawmakers were taking furious notes. The Whiskey Rebellion became the go-to reference for every future riot or uprising. Was this the playbook? Swift force plus a sprinkle of mercy? Or a slippery slope to executive overreach? Oh, and the whiskey tax itself? Total bust. It cost more to enforce than it earned, was dodged like a pro, and was so toxic that by the early 1800s, Jefferson, now president, gave it the boot. The rebels lost the fight but won the vibe check. The frontier didn't forget, and neither did the feds. Future presidents faced their own rebellions, big and small, with the ghost of 1794 whispering, "Order's fragile, and the republic's always one bad barrel from a bar fight." The Whiskey Rebellion sounds like a quirky footnote today, a boozy side quest in America's origin story, but its legacy still simmers like moonshine vapor. It showed the Constitution had teeth, proving the feds could back up their laws with boots and bayonets. Washington leading troops himself gave it epic gravitas, and every president since, Lincoln, Eisenhower, even modern ones calling in the National Guard, owes a nod to that precedent. From rural resistance to the flex of federal power, the rebellion's fingerprints are all over America's story, reminding us that liberty, whiskey, and a good old-fashioned standoff are never far apart. Every president since, swinging big sticks or calling in the National Guard, owes a tip of the hat to 1794, when Washington saddled up and turned tax-dodging farmers into a cautionary tale. The Whiskey Rebellion didn't just flex federal muscle, it poured a double shot of skepticism into America's political soul. Those frontier folks' distrust of far-off elites became as American as apple pie or flipping off the IRS. It didn't matter that the rebels lost. Their screw-you spirit lives on in tax protests, states' rights rants, and the deep U.S. obsession with telling D.C. to mind its own business. The rebellion planted seeds of defiance that didn't die, they just fermented, like a fine moonshine left to age. And speaking of whiskey, it didn't just survive, it became a national mascot. Far from being shunned, whiskey turned into a symbol of rugged independence. Think less taxable beverage, more liquid middle finger. Today's bourbon and rye industry struts its rebel roots like a peacock with a distillery. You've got bottles named after rebellion ringleaders, labels screaming frontier vibes and slogans, practically daring the feds to try taxing them again. It's less a drink and more a patriotic flex in a glass. The Whiskey Rebellion taught America a core truth. How you handle dissent defines who you are. Washington went hard with force, but followed it with forgiveness, setting a gold standard for power with principles. It's not always followed. Plenty of leaders skip the mercy part, but it's the yardstick. So next time you sip some bourbon, know you're not just drinking liquor. You're toasting a saga of power, protest, and a scrappy young nation figuring out if it was a republic or a bar fight. Cheers to the rebellion that shaped the vibe. Around 1754 BCE, King Hammurabi of Babylon carved his famous code into a giant basalt stele, a legal flex so big it screamed, "Bow to my justice, peasants." It's one of humanity's first stabs at writing down laws, but tucked among its 282 rules is something older than law itself: keeping women in check. In Hammurabi's world, a woman wasn't a person. She was a job title: daughter, wife, widow, mom. Each came with a rule book, a script, and a punishment if you ad-libbed. Take marriage. Dads could trade their daughters like Pokemon cards, passing them from one household to another. Once hitched, a wife had to keep it 100% loyal. Adultery? You and your side piece got tied up and yeeted into a river. No, not a metaphor. Hammurabi meant splash. But if your husband was feeling forgiving, the court might let you skip the swim. Grim, yet oddly romantic. Meanwhile, if a guy cheated, Hammurabi just shrugged. Male infidelity wasn't news, it was Tuesday. Women's honor was family honor, but men's, negotiable. Not every law was a patriarchal punch, though. Widows got some surprising perks. They could stay in their late husband's house, manage his stuff until the kids grew up, and if there were no sons, even inherit the goods. Hammurabi was like, "Fine, ladies, you can handle money, but only if you're widowed and follow the family script." Divorce was an option, too, if your husband was a jerk, but proving it was harder than assembling IKEA furniture with no instruction. Fail, and you'd be branded a liar, with a side of severe punishment. Justice wasn't blind, it just had a squinting bias against anyone in a veil. So what's the vibe of Hammurabi's code for women? They weren't invisible, they were hyper-visible, cataloged, judged, and occasionally shielded, but always on a leash. The law gave them a spot, but rarely the pen to write their own story. Now hop a few hundred miles west and fast forward a bit to ancient Egypt, where justice was personified by Maat, the goddess of truth, balance, and don't mess with the cosmic order. Compared to their neighbors, Egyptians were shockingly woke, at least on papyrus, when it came to women's rights. Ladies, rich or poor, could own property, inherit land, sue, get sued, and even file for divorce. These weren't just pretty words carved on tombs. They were real rights in cities like Thebes and Memphis. Women signed contracts, witnessed deals, wrote wills, ran businesses, lent cash, and bought slaves or livestock like they were shopping at an ancient Costco. So this was next-level stuff. Women weren't barred from temples or courts. Some were priestesses, judges, or scribes, basically running the show in robes and eyeliner. Legal records from the New Kingdom show women dragging male relatives to court and winning. But, yep, there's always a catch. Society kept a tight leash. You could own land, but you were nudged to pass it to male heirs. The law said, go for it, but culture whispered, not so fast, queen. Marriage wasn't a religious hoopla, but a legal contract, binding like a modern prenup. Women had wiggle room, but the patriarchy still loomed, reminding them who held the real power. Egypt's system was progressive for its time, but it wasn't a feminist utopia. Just a place where women got a slightly longer leash before the inevitable tug. In ancient Egypt, divorce was as flexible as a yoga instructor. You could split for infertility, infidelity, or just because your spouse's vibes were off. Music, emotional incompatibility was legit grounds. No scarlet letter here. Moms usually kept the kids, held on to their dowry, and often scored extra property like a breakup bonus. The law preached equal punishment, but let's be real. Class and connections trumped gender. A noble woman could skate on scandals that'd send a peasant gal swimming with the crocodiles. Literally. So was Egypt a feminist paradise? Not quite. Compared to Mesopotamia's stay in your lane or Greece's women who vibes, Egypt gave ladies a seat at the legal table. Not as equals, but at least as people, not furniture. In a world run by pharaohs and gods, that was a flex worth framing. Hop over to ancient India, where women's lives were ruled by dharma, Hindu philosophy's fancy word for know your place. The Manusmriti, Laws of Manu, scribbled between 200 BCE and 200 CE, was the rule book, and it had thoughts on women. One page gushed, "Honor women and the gods throw a party." The next, never let a woman think for herself. It's like the text was written by a poet with a split personality, 1 minute worshiping women, the next chaining them to the kitchen. Women were legally tethered to male babysitters for life. Dad as a kid, husband in marriage, sons in widowhood. Independence? Not in this script. Obedience was the star of the show. Marriage was the main plot. Get hitched, pop out sons, and worship your husband like he's a demigod. Widows remarrying? Major side-eye, sometimes outright banned, depending on caste or era. And sati, the grim tradition of widows yeeting themselves onto their husband's funeral pyre. The Manusmriti didn't mandate it, but gave it a creepy nod, like, not required, but points for style. There were plot twists, though. Upper caste women could sometimes get educated or inherit if no dudes were around. In southern India, matrilineal vibes let women flex as advisors, poets, or even queens. Rare but iconic. Divorce? Technically possible for stuff like cruelty or abandonment, but good luck proving it without a lawyer and a time machine. Men, meanwhile, could ditch a marriage easier than canceling a chariot subscription. Adultery? A woman might get disfigured or exiled. A high-stepper guy? Maybe a fine or a don't do it again wink. In short, Hindu law draped women in praise and shackles. They were sacred, like a temple statue you admire but don't let vote. Revered, sure, but empowered? Only if the stars aligned and the patriarchy took a nap. Now, let's jet to ancient Greece, land of democracy, philosophy, and women being legally ghosted. In Athens, women weren't people, they were eternal minors, chained to their nearest male relative like a legal ankle monitor. Athenian law was a masterclass in exclusion. Women couldn't vote, own property solo, or strut into court without a man signing off. Leaving the house? Better have a male escort, or you're grounded. If Hammurabi's code put women on a leash, Athens locked them in the kennel and threw away the key. Marriage? Less love story, more property deal. Your Kyrios, dad or brother, and maybe some goats, like you were a living Craigslist ad. Here's the kicker. Your fidelity was a legal obsession. Commit adultery? Your husband could divorce you faster than you can say scandal. And the guy you were with? Straight to the executioner, no trial needed. Meanwhile, hubby could party with courtesans or slaves, and the law just shrugged. Double standards weren't a bug. They were the whole operating system. Women couldn't file for divorce, but if their husband ditched or abused them, they could limp back to dad's house, assuming he didn't yeet them right back. Athenian women couldn't even sneeze without a male relative's permission. Legal action? Forget it. Your Kyrios had to play lawyer even for horrors like rape or assault. Sparta, though, was the wild card. Spartan gals could own land, hit the books, and strut around free as birds. But Sparta was the exception, not the rule. Everywhere else, women were expected to be as noticeable as a ninja in a fog bank. The ideal Athenian woman was modest, mute, and basically a ghost. Say her name too loud and you'd get side-eye like you'd farted in the Parthenon. Yet, behind the legal curtain, women kept the world spinning. Raising kids, running households, and occasionally pulling strings from the shadows. Officially, though, not citizens, just whispers in a system obsessed with male logic and liberty. Ancient Rome, with its togas and take-no-prisoners vibe, had a legal system as structured as a centurion's haircut. Roman women weren't equals. Let's not get crazy, but compared to Greece's stay invisible memo, they had a bit more wiggle room. Still, it was a patriarchal party with a strict dress code. Born a girl, you were under your dad's patria potestas, fancy Latin for he owns you. Marriage either handed you to your husband, Manus, or kept you tied to your birth family, sine manu, which got trendier over time. The latter let women, especially widows or rich daughters, flex some muscle, owning estates, running businesses, or signing contracts like a toga-wearing tycoon. Voting or holding office? Hey, no. But suing in court or playing guardian? Sure, with a male co-sigma, of course. The ideal Roman gal was pudica modest, loyal, and obedient, like a well-trained puppy. Augustus's moral reforms turned adultery into a public crime for women. Get caught, and you could lose your dowry, get exiled, or worse. Men cheating, the law yawned. Patriarchy, as usual, brought its agam in hypocrisy. But there were VIP exceptions. Vestal virgins, Vesta's holy squad, ditched male guardians for 30 years of chastity, scoring mad prestige, legal freedom, and the power to pardon death row prisoners. The catch? Break that vow and you're buried alive. Talk about high stakes for a divine side hustle. Upper-class matrons also worked the system, using family ties, marriage deals, and dramatic public mourning to nudge politics. By the imperial era, tutela was often just a formality, like a legal participation trophy. Roman women lived in a legal cage, sure, but the bars were wide enough for some to moonwalk through, especially if they had cash or clout. Constrained? Yep. Silenced? Not entirely. They were playing 3D chess in a world that wanted them stuck at checkers. In ancient Hebrew society, law wasn't just rules, it was God's group chat, delivered via the Torah and rabbis. Women were both exalted and boxed in, expected to be the moral glue of the family while bowing to male authority. Dads picked your husband, hubbies ran the house, and sons got the land. Daughters? Your job was to marry out with a dowry and not make a fuss. But women weren't totally muted. The ketubah, a marriage contract, was like a prenup with teeth, guaranteeing financial support and spelling out spousal duties. If your man slacked on food, clothes, or bedroom action, you could push for divorce, though you needed a rabbinic court or male kin to make the case, because apparently women couldn't be trusted with their own drama. Adultery laws? Brutally lopsided. Married woman with another guy? Stoning city, per Deuteronomy. Man with a married woman? Same deal. But if she was unmarried or a slave, it was a sliding scale of fines or forced marriage, depending on who had the better lawyer. Rape? The law said the perp paid a fine and married the victim. Yep, a legal facepalm that makes modern jaws drop. Ritual purity laws added extra shade. During menstruation or childbirth, women were impure, sidelined from religious life, and touched like they were radioactive. It wasn't about sin, but marked them as other, like they were guest starring in a divine soap opera. Yet the Hebrew Bible's got some badass women stealing the spotlight. Deborah, the judge, dropping truth bombs. Ruth, the widow, gaming the inheritance system. Esther, bending royal law to save her people. They were outliers, but proof that guts, smarts, and faith could kick down doors the law tried to lock. The Achaemenid Empire, kicked off by Cyrus the Great in the 6th century BCE, was a sprawling multicultural party stretching from Babylon to Greece, Egypt to Mesopotamia. Persian law kept the chaos in check with a chill, pragmatic vibe rare for the ancient world. And guess what? Women, especially the VIP ones, got to strut their stuff in ways that would make Athenian gals weep with envy. No single Hammurabi's big block of rules here. Persian law was pieced together from court docs, admin records, and royal flexes carved in stone. Elite women were the rock stars of this system. Take Atossa, Cyrus the Great's daughter and Xerxes' mom. She wasn't just a trophy queen, she ran estates, bossed around admins, and popped up in inscriptions as a land-owning, deal-making powerhouse. The Persepolis tablets spill the tea. High-ranking women managed work crews, oversaw production, and got rations like they were running a royal startup. Marriage and family laws mixed local flavors with imperial oversight. Persian women could own property, sign contracts, and inherit land, rights that made Greece and Rome look like they were stuck in the Stone Age. Dowries were locked down tight, and if a marriage tanked, ladies could reclaim their cash. Divorce was on the table for both sides, though husbands had an easier time unless the wife could prove abuse or infertility. Good luck with that. Adultery? Big no-no, especially for women. Think death penalty vibes. But class mattered. A noble gal might get house arrest, while a servant was toast. Zoroastrianism, the empire's spiritual guide, gave women cosmic cred, but hit them with purity rules for menstruation and childbirth, echoing Hebrew and Hindu, your temporarily radioactive memos. Persian law was a mixed bag. Elite status equaled loud legal voice. Low rank equals quiet corner. Freedom came with a crown, respect with religion, but custom kept the leash tight. Ancient China didn't just have laws, it had a whole vibe of harmony, hierarchy, and Confucian, everyone stay in your lane morality. For women, this meant being legal cogs in the family machine, valued for duty, not dreams. The Zhou dynasty started jotting down rules, but the Han dynasty, 206 BCE to 120 CE, turned Confucian fortune cookbook wisdom into hard law. Confucius' three obediences were the gospel. Obey your dad, pre-marriage, your husband during, and your sons if you're widowed. This wasn't just advice. It was the legal script. Women were sidekicks in every scene, barred from public office, rarely waltzing into court solo, and usually cut out of inheritance in patrilineal clans. Daughters were loved at home but legally temporary, destined to marry out with a dowry and a wave. Marriage was a family merger with a side of paperwork. Men could ditch their wives for anything from jealousy to a bad cough, though they couldn't if she had nowhere to go. Mourned his parents like a champ or popped out sons. Women wanting out? Only with proof of extreme abuse, and even then, they needed a male relative to play advocate, because apparently, women's complaints needed a beard to be valid. Adultery laws were a patriarchal power move. Woman caught cheating? Straight to execution city. Man with a married woman? Maybe a slap on the wrist. Fooling around with a servant or concubine? The law just winked and said, boys will be boys. Honor was all about the lady's womb. Keep it legit, or else. But there were outliers. Empresses like Lu Zi and Wu Zetian didn't just bend the law, they yeeted it, ruling like bosses and rewriting the script. In peasant villages, widows running households or family businesses had clout, even if the law pretended they didn't exist. Chinese laws saw women as harmony's glue, vital but always second to the guys, supposedly keeping the cosmic playlist on track. Zoom out across the ancient world, from Babylon's ziggurats to Rome's palaces, Vedic India to Confucian China, and one thing's crystal. Women were legally seen, shaped, and shackled. They weren't invisible, but their spotlight came with strings, and the script was always written by someone else. Ancient laws didn't just include women, they assigned them a starring role in a male-written script. From Hammurabi's stone slab to the Manusmriti's fine print, the vibe was clear. A woman's identity was a team sport. Daughter, wife, mom, widow, her rights, her duties, all funneled through the men calling the shots. The law didn't empower her, it put her in a box with a label and dared her to stay put. Some places, like Egypt and Persia, tossed women a bit of freedom, like letting them own property, sign contracts, or inherit a chunk of the family gold. Fancy ladies in these spots could flex hard, sometimes outshining the dudes. But don't get it twisted, this wasn't girl boss equality. It was a VIP pass for the elite, handed out based on class, connections, and cosmic luck. Not some woke belief in fairness. Meanwhile, Greece and Rome built legal masterpieces while telling women to sit in the corner. Athens? Women were legal ghosts barely existing outside their dad's or husband's shadow. Rome gave a bit more wiggle room, ladies could hustle property or sue with a male co-signer naturally, but they were still caged by be a good girl expectations and male babysitters. Freedom? More like a leash with extra steps. In China, Confucius turned obedient femininity into a legal commandment. The law wasn't just about justice, it was about keeping the cosmic playlist on shuffle. Everyone in their lane, especially women. Hindu law pulled a similar stunt, worshipping women on one page while chaining them to duty on the next. Sacred? Sure. Free? Not unless you count free to obey as a win. Religious codes like Jewish halakha or Zoroastrian purity rules put women on a tightrope between holy and hazardous. A woman's body could be a blessing or a curse, depending on how well she followed the rulebook. Yet, despite the legal straitjackets, women didn't just roll over. They schemed, prayed, and hustled through family ties, faith, or sheer stubbornness, shaping dynasties and societies from the sidelines. Their names might not be chiseled in stone, but their fingerprints are all over history. Long before Wall Street's shiny suits and crypto bros, banking was born in the dusty, mud brick cities of Mesopotamia, civilization's OG startup hub. And surprise, the first bankers weren't pinstripe-wearing financiers. They were priests. In cities like Uruk, Lagash, and Babylon, temples weren't just for praying. They were the local bank, HR, and IRS rolled into one. These ziggurat HQs were the economic pulse of the city. Farmers and merchants didn't just show up to worship. They came to deposit grain, snag loans, or settle debts. Why trust a temple? Because gods don't ghost you with your savings, and priests had scribes scribbling records like ancient accountants on a clay tablet bender. Drop off your harvest, and you'd get a tablet etched with your name, the amount, the date, and maybe a witness That tablet wasn't just a receipt, it was the great-granddaddy of checks. You could hand it to a creditor to clear a debt, or trade it for goods like an ancient Venmo. Temples also played loan shark, dishing out grain, silver, or sheep at interest rates that'd make a payday lender blush. 20% for grain, 33% for silver. Default? Kiss your land, stuff, or even freedom goodbye. Compound interest was a known menace, scaring folks enough that Hammurabi's code tried to slap some limits on it. Others leaned into debt slavery like it was a vibe. This was banking at its rawest. Brilliant for its time, brutal for your wallet. Modern banks might have glass towers and apps, but their DNA traces back to Mesopotamia's holy hustle, where the gods didn't just judge your soul, they audited your account. By the time Babylon hit its peak under Hammurabi in the 18th century BCE, banking had leveled up from temple side hustle to legit business. Temples and palaces still ran the show, but a new crew rolled in: private money lenders. These weren't marble lobby types. They operated out of shacks, market stalls, or temple-adjacent pop-ups, offering something temples didn't: flexibility. Temple loans were tied to harvest seasons, but private lenders were the ancient equivalent of "you need cash, I got you." They tailored deals for merchants, traders, and craftsmen, slinging silver, Babylon's go-to currency, weighed by the shekel since coins weren't a thing yet. Loans came with clay tablet contracts listing the who, what, when, and how much, plus interest and collateral. Yup, your family. Some contracts read like mob threats. Pay up or your kids are my new interns. One slick move: joint liability loans where buddies co-signed to split the risk. Basically the ancient version of, I'll get you next time, bro. Debt was Babylon's lifeblood. Farmers borrowed to plant, merchants to fund caravan adventures, and builders to erect ziggurats or whatever. Banking wasn't just business, it was the glue holding Babylon's hustle together, one clay tablet at a time. Debt slavery was a real buzzkill in Babylon, but Hammurabi's code threw a lifeline. Got your crops wiped out by a storm? No worries. You might skip interest that season. Hammurabi's version of active God insurance. Babylon also cooked up promissory notes and letters of credit, letting merchants move money across deserts without lugging silver, and praying bandits didn't RSVP. These were the OG wire transfers, keeping trades spicy and robbery free. Think banking's all modern with its apps and stock tickers. Nah, Babylon was already playing the game. Lending, collateral, interest, risk, the whole shebang. Their tools were clay, not code. But the hustle was pure Wall Street, minus the overpriced coffee. In ancient Egypt, life revolved around the Nile's flow and the pharaoh's grain stashes. Egypt didn't have Babylon's banker swagger, but it ran a tight financial ship, with temples, royal treasuries, and granaries bigger than a pyramid's ego. Forget coins or silver. Grain was king. Wheat and barley weren't just dinner, they were money. Taxes, wages, debts, all counted in sacks of the good stuff. Temples doubled as Fort Knox for grain, with scribes scribbling every transaction on ostraka, pottery shards, or papyrus like ancient accountants with a paper-cut vendetta. Drop 10 sacks at the Thebes granary and you'd get a receipt you could trade or cash in elsewhere. Basically a proto-bank draft, no Venmo required. Farmers borrowed seed grain in spring, promising to pay back post-harvest with interest that'd make a loan shark blush. 25 to 30% was standard. Default? Say goodbye to your land, cows, or freedom. Unlike Babylon's freewheeling lenders, Egypt kept private lending on a short leash. The state, with its priests and royal bureaucrats, ran the show like a grain-obsessed micromanager. Still, some records show private citizens, yep, even women, playing creditor in small-town deals. Proving you didn't need a beard to hustle. Mines only showed up late thanks to Persian and Greek gatecrashers, but Egypt stuck to grain and barter, proving you don't need shiny metal to keep an economy popping. Just trust, storage, and a lot of paperwork. Egypt's temple-based system wasn't a Roman bank's marble flex or Babylon's contract chaos, but it was a grain-powered machine that kept the lights on for millennia, built on scribes, silos, and bureaucracy thicker than a pharaoh's ego. Fast forward to ancient Greece's city-states like Athens and Corinth in the 5th century BCE, where two game changers hit the scene: minted coins and money changers. Unlike Mesopotamia's grain or Egypt's barter vibes, Greeks went all in on metal coins, state-stamped, regulated, and shiny enough to make a merchant swoon. Enter the trapezatai, the OGs of finance, named for the trapeza, the table, they parked at in the agora, ready to swap coins, take deposits, or sling loans. These guys were money changers, bankers, and part-time therapists, holding cash for safekeeping, offering loans and tracking accounts like ancient QuickBooks. Need to send money to another city? No need to haul coins and dodge bandits. The trapezatai issued drafts, the ancient equivalent of, "I'll PayPal you." Lending was their bread and butter, especially for risky gigs like maritime trade. Interest rates, try 100% for sea voyages, justified by shipwrecks, pirates, or Poseidon's bad mood. Maritime contracts spelled out cargo, routes, and collateral. If the ship sank, loan canceled. If it docked, cha-ching. Private citizens got in on the action too, with rich Athenians tossing out loans backed by property or, slaves. These deals were notarized with witnesses and scribes, and Greek courts were drowning in debt disputes, proving lawsuits and money go together like olives and feta. But Greek banks weren't shiny institutions. They were more like financial freelancers with big reps and zero safety nets. No licenses, no regulations, no FDIC. If your trapezites bolted with your stash, you were out of luck. Trust was the only currency that mattered, and it could vanish faster than a philosopher's hot take in a debate. Greece's banking scene was chaotic, brilliant, and a reminder that money's always been a high-stakes trust fall. Despite the sketchy vibes, Greece's financial scene was a banger. It fueled trade, bankrolled empire flexes, and even paid for wars to settle philosophical beefs. In a land obsessed with logic and debates, contracts, ledgers, and interest rates were the real MVPs. Greece showed us that once you slap a value on a shiny coin, you're on a wild ride, from debt to profit, risk to ruin. Basically capitalism's origin story with better sandals. By the time Rome was running the Mediterranean like a toga-clad mob boss, banking went from small-time loans to the financial V8 engine of an empire. Romans didn't invent banking, they just took it, polished it, and scaled it like a startup going IPO. Meet the Argentari, Rome's banker bros, hustling from tabernet shops near the Forum. These guys were money changers, deposit safekeepers, lenders, and payment middlemen, basically the ancient equivalent of a bank teller with a side hustle. They swapped coins from every corner of the empire, held your cash for safekeeping, dished out loans, and even played Venmo for clients. Rich Romans, think senators with villas, parked fat stacks with these bankers, who tracked it all in rationes, the great-granddaddies of your Google Sheets budget. Want to pay someone without leaving your couch? Authorize your banker to dip into your deposit? Boom, you've got checks before checks were cool. Sending money to Carthage or Alexandria? No need to haul coins. A letter of credit had you covered. Credit was Rome's rocket fuel. Loans weren't just for my chariot broke down. Emergencies. They funded trade, land grabs, construction, and even shady election campaigns. Some things never change. Interest rates hovered around 12%, but could spike or dip, depending on how sketchy the deal was. Charging crazy high rates was frowned upon, but mostly ignored, because Romans loved a good hustle. Collateral was king. Land, slaves, or your future earnings could back a loan. Default? Get ready for court, property seizures, or, in worst-case scenarios, a one-way ticket to enslavement. Rome even had proto-corporations called Societates Publicanorum, profit-hungry crews handling big government gigs like tax collection. With investors, managers, and shareholders, they were basically ancient Goldman Sachs with togas. But risks were real. No FDIC here. Some banking houses crashed, sparking panics that'd make a modern stock market blush. Rome's money flowed through temples, forums, and estates, tying farmers, traders, soldiers, and senators in a web of credit, debt, and interest that screamed, "Empire, baby!" Before central banks were a twinkle in anyone's eye, state control over money was already flipping the script. Minting coins wasn't just about economics, it was a political power move. Whoever stamped the coin owned the people's trust, and that trust was banking's backbone. Around 600 BCE, Lydia, modern-day Turkey, dropped the first coins, made of electrum, gold, silver, bling. No more weighing silver chunks in a sweaty market, value was now a quick glance away. The coin craze spread faster than a TikTok trend. Greeks minted drachmas, Persians slung darics, and Romans built an empire on denarii. These coins weren't just cash, they were propaganda swag. Stamped with gods, rulers, or Rome rules slogans to scream legitimacy. A coin didn't just buy stuff, it reminded you who was boss. State-backed coins changed the game. Hoards piled up in temples, homes, and merchant vaults. Lending got easier, coins zipped across city-states, and standardized weights meant traders could cross borders without a scale and a prayer. Bankers, from Mesopotamian loan sharks to Roman argentarii, loved the certainty. No more sniffing silver for purity, they just counted coins by type and issuer. This slashed transaction drama, supercharged trade routes, and made loans less of a gamble. Coins also birthed baby versions of inflation and monetary policy. Rulers could stretch their treasuries by sneaking cheap metals into coins, but it tanked trust. Roman emperors pulled this to pay armies, sparking devaluation and economic wobbles. Still, the concept stuck. State-backed currency, stamped with authority, was the seed for everything from medieval gold to today's fiat bucks. Every ancient coin was a mini-contract, a promise and a flex of empire, whispering, "This is worth something because I say so." Temples weren't just for worshiping gods, they were the OGs of safe deposit boxes, banks, and loan offices. Why? Because folks trusted deities way more than kings, merchants, or that shady guy offering no questions asked loans. Take Delphi's Sanctuary of Apollo. Not just a spiritual hotspot, but a financial fortress. City-states stashed war chests there, rich folks parked their fortunes, and temples like Delos, Ephesus, and Jerusalem moonlighted as banks, with top-tier security, prestige, and scribes who tracked every shekel like ancient CPAs. A temple vault guarded by divine bouncers was safer than any fortress or your uncle's sketchy safe. Temples weren't just ATMs for prayers, they were full-on financial hubs. In Mesopotamia, as early as the 3rd millennium BCE, priests slung loans, demanding grain or silver repayments like holy loan sharks. Egypt's temple granaries hoarded wealth, issued receipts, and kept trade humming. In Greece and Rome, temples stashed public funds, war loot, and even bankrolled festivals or construction. All under a deity's "don't mess with me" glare. Athens' Temple of Athena on the Acropolis wasn't just a tourist trap. It loaned silver to the city for public works, with interest rates that'd make even Zeus raise an eyebrow. Gods, apparently, were chill creditors who didn't rush you for repayments. Eternity's a long game. Religion also set the moral vibe for finance. Ancient Hebrew law banned charging interest to fellow Israelites, but gave a green light for foreigners. Spiritual tribalism, with a side of economic shade. Hindu Dharma texts preached fair lending and warned that shady deals could tank your soul's credit score. Long before credit cards or zero-down mortgage ads, ancient economies ran on the OG buy now, pay later hustle. From Mesopotamian farmers to Roman senators, if you needed cash, you hit up a lender. Then prayed your harvest or trade deal didn't flop. Interest wasn't optional, it was the price of dreaming big. In Babylon, rates were spicy, 20% for grain, 33% for silver, compounded annually. That wasn't predatory, it was just Tuesday. High risk, high reward, and if your caravan got jacked or crops failed, you were still on the hook. Temples and private lenders got fat off these loans, while unpaid debts could land you in debt slavery or cost you your stuff. In Athens, interest rates swung wild depending on the gamble. Maritime loans were the riskiest. Lenders fronted silver for trade voyages, knowing pirates or storms could yeet the ship. Rates could hit 100% or more, but if the boat docked, everyone got paid, like it was payday at the Parthenon. Romans brought the legal muscle. Loan contracts were written, witnessed, and sealed tighter than a gladiator's armor. Collateral, land, slaves, or your future hustle was spelled out in detail. Miss a payment, your creditor could drag you to court, snatch your property, or, in rare cases, turn you into their personal servant. Rome capped interest at 12%, but loopholes let lenders sneak in extra juice, especially when the economy was wobbling. Borrowing was as common as togas. Farmers needed seeds, merchants needed goods, and politicians needed campaign bling. Fraud? Oh, it was in the game. Lenders tacked on admin fees or demanded bribes, while borrowers fudged collateral or pulled a disappearing act. No credit scores, no regulators, just vibes and reputation. Ancient loans weren't just cash grabs, they were power moves. Borrowing meant betting your land, freedom, or even your family on a better tomorrow, or at least one where you didn't starve. From Mesopotamia's grain receipts to Rome's silver ledgers, ancient banking wasn't some dusty footnote. It was the bedrock of global finance. These systems didn't just keep local markets buzzing, they built the scaffolding for money as we know it. The core problem then is the same now: trust. Could you trust the silver's weight, the temple's grain stash, the lender who swore he wouldn't ghost you? From that shaky trust sprang contracts, record-keeping, and the first inklings of big boy finance. The ancients were wild for their time. Babylonians whipped up loan contracts with interest, terms, and witnesses etched in cuneiform like legal tattoos. Greeks invented letters of credit letting you move money between city-states without schlepping coins. Romans formed banker guilds and baked debt enforcement into civil law, stretching a financial web from Britain to Syria. Modern checks? They're just Mesopotamian clay receipts with better branding. Collateralized loans? Babylonian and Roman OG. Central banking, born when rulers tweaked coin purity or temple wealth to fund wars or fancy aqueducts. Ancient societies weren't clueless about financial meltdowns. Oh, they knew the chaos of a bad loan spree. In Babylon, kings would occasionally hit the reset button with debt forgiveness, like a divine Control+Alt+Delete to stop society from imploding under the weight of unpaid grain tabs. Roman emperors, not to be outdone, slapped caps on interest rates to rein in lenders who thought 50% was a cute starting point. These weren't just economic band-aids, they were political flexes to keep the plebs from rioting and the elites from hoarding all the shiny stuff. The real kicker? Banking's not some shiny new invention. Swap clay tablets for spreadsheets, silver shekels for crypto scams, and it's the same old human circus. Risk, greed, trust, panic, and that eternal hope you'll strike it rich. Next time you tap your phone to pay for overpriced coffee or cringe at your credit card bill, give a nod to the Mesopotamian scribes, royal coin stampers, and farmers betting their barley on a sunny season. You're not breaking new ground. You're just remixing a 4,000-year-old hustle. It all boils down to one cheeky idea. To build a future, sometimes you've got to borrow against it. Ancient banking wasn't just about moving money. It was about dreaming bigger than your wallet, even if it meant risking your goats, your freedom, or your sanity. And that, folks, is the eternal financial soap opera. Same drama, different props. Now let's talk about the other side of ancient banking, the social flex that came with flashing your financial clout. In places like Babylon or Rome, being a lender wasn't just a job, it was a status symbol, like strutting around with a gold-plated chariot or a TikTok-verified badge. Wealthy lenders threw lavish parties, sponsored public works, or built temples to show off their coin stacks, all while quietly raking in interest from desperate borrowers. It was philanthropy with a catch. Sure, I'll fund your city's new aqueduct, but you're paying me back at 25%, and don't forget to name it after me. This wasn't just about ego. Lending gave you power. In Rome, argenteri and elite financiers could sway political campaigns by bankrolling candidates, or, accidentally cutting off funds to their rivals. In Athens, trapezitai who held the city's war chest could nudge decisions without ever picking up a spear. Money didn't just talk, it screamed. And those holding the purse strings were the real puppet masters, pulling levers behind the scenes while everyone else argued over democracy or divine will. And let's not forget the little guy or gal. While the big shots dominated, ancient records show regular folks, including women, dipping their toes into the lending game. In Egypt, women like Nanukhte, a savvy widow from the New Kingdom, show up in papyri as creditors, loaning grain or silver to neighbors and racking up interest like a proto-shark. In Babylon, women from merchant families sometimes managed small-scale loans, proving you didn't need a beard to make bank. These weren't feminist utopias, but they show that money could crack open doors even in patriarchal systems, especially if you had the cash to grease the hinges. Another quirky gem? Ancient banking wasn't just about hard assets like grain or coins. It flirted with intangibles too. In Mesopotamia, some contracts included future labor as collateral, meaning you could borrow now and pay later by working it off, like signing up for indentured servitude with extra steps. In Rome, elite patrons lent money to clients in exchange for political loyalty or public praise, turning loans into social IOUs. It's like crowdfunding a senator's campaign, except instead of a t-shirt, you owe him your vote and a few years of groveling. Then there's the wild world of ancient insurance. Greeks and Romans didn't have Allstate, but they had maritime loan clauses that acted like proto-insurance. If your ship sank, the loan was wiped, kind of like betting your cargo against Poseidon's mood swings. In Babylon, some lenders offered risk-sharing deals, spreading losses across multiple investors, an early whisper of modern insurance pool. These hacks show ancient folks weren't just throwing dice with their money, they were rigging the game to hedge their bets. Culturally, banking shaped how people saw wealth and worth. In Confucian China, lending was frowned upon as ungentlemanly. Scholars were supposed to sip tea and ponder virtue, not chase interest. Yet, merchant families quietly built fortunes lending to farmers or traders, proving even Confucius couldn't stop the hustle. In Rome, being a lender could make you a hero or a villain. Cicero praised honest financiers who funded public good, but poets like Juvenal roasted them as greedy leeches, sucking the empire dry. Sound familiar? It's the same love-hate we've got with bankers today. Everyone needs them, but nobody trusts them. Fast forward to modern parallels, and it's spooky how little has changed. Ancient debt jubilees? They're the distant cousins of today's student loan forgiveness debates. Roman interest caps? Think CFPB regulations trying to keep payday lenders in check. And those Mesopotamian scribes obsessively tracking every shekel? They're the ancestors of your bank's algorithm dinging you for a $35.00 overdraft fee. The tech's fancier, but the game's the same. Trust, power, and the eternal gamble that you'll pay back what you owe before the repo man, or the temple priest, knocks. So, what's the big takeaway? Ancient banking wasn't just about moving grain or silver. It was about weaving trust into the chaos of human ambition. Every loan, every coin, every clay tablet was a bet on the future, a handshake across time. From Babylonian farmers to Roman tycoons, people borrowed to build, to dream, to survive. And yeah, sometimes they got burned, but that's the beauty of the hustle. It's messy, it's risky, and it's as human as arguing over who gets the last slice of flatbread. Cheers to the ancients for showing us how to borrow trouble and make it pay. Let's dive into a corner of ancient banking that doesn't get enough spotlight. How it bankrolled the art of war. Forget chariots and catapults. Empires ran on cash, and ancient bankers were the unsung MVPs of conquest. In Rome, argenterii didn't just fund toga parties, they fronted the silver to outfit legions, build warships, and bribe barbarian tribes to please not sack us. When Julius Caesar needed to flex on Gaul, he didn't just rally troops, he rallied loans, leaning on wealthy financiers to keep his war machine humming. One bad campaign could tank a lender, but a victory? That meant fat profits from plundered gold and enslaved captives. War was just banking with extra swords. In Athens, the Trapezitai played war piggy bank too. During the Peloponnesian War, temples like Apollo's at Delphi loaned out sacred funds to keep the navy afloat. Literally. These weren't charity gigs. The interest rates were steep enough to make Athena wince. Mesopotamian temples got in on the action as well, lending grain or silver to kings for campaigns, with the unspoken rule, pay us back or the gods will have words. Banking didn't just enable war, it shaped who could afford to swing the bigger spear, proving that even in antiquity, money was the real commander-in-chief. Now let's talk about the stigma of debt, because owing money in the ancient world wasn't just a financial L, it was a social roast. In Confucian China, borrowing was seen as a moral fumble, like forgetting your lines in the great play of harmony. Scholars sneered at merchants who lent for profit, calling it grubby, yet those same merchants were the ones keeping the silk flowing. In Rome, elite debtors could dodge shame by spinning loans as favors among friends, but regular Joes, default, and you'd be the town's laughingstock, your name whispered like a curse in the forum. Greek poets like Aristophanes loved dunking on debtors, painting them as bumbling fools dodging creditors in the agora. This stigma wasn't just cultural shade, it had teeth. In Babylon, chronic debtors could lose their land or freedom, branded as failures in a society that worshipped success. Debt wasn't just a number, it was a scarlet letter. A reminder that borrowing meant gambling your rep along with your riches. And yet, everyone did it, because who can resist the siren call of just one more loan? Ancient banking also birthed some weirdly creative financial tricks that deserve a shout-out. In Mesopotamia, silent partnerships let investors fund trade caravans without getting their hands dirty. You'd toss in silver, sit back, and rake in profits or losses if the caravan made it. It's like venture capital, but with donkeys instead of startups. In Rome, nominatio contracts let you transfer debt to someone else, like hot potatoing your IOU to an unsuspecting pal. These proto-derivatives show ancients weren't just crunching numbers, they were inventing financial gymnastics to dodge risk and chase rewards. And let's not skip the underdogs. Banking wasn't all for the elite. Marginalized groups sometimes got a slice of the action. In Egypt, temple records show freed slaves and low-ranking scribes acting as small-time lenders, hustling grain loans to neighbors. In Athens, resident foreigners medikoi ran side gigs as trapezitai, serving clients the bigwigs ignored. These folks weren't headlining the agora, but their microloans kept local economies ticking, proving that even in a world rigged for the powerful, the little guy could sneak in a hustle, especially if they had a knack for math. Religion and superstition were banking's weird sidekicks too. In Mesopotamia, lenders sealed deals with oaths to gods like Shamash, swearing they wouldn't screw each other over, because nothing says, "I'll pay you back," like a divine lie detector. In Greece, oracles sometimes doubled as financial advisors. Merchants would trek to Delphi, asking Apollo if a trade venture was worth the loan. Spoiler, the priests, who often had skin in the game, gave suspiciously pro-lending advice. In Rome, some bankers offered curse tablets to hex deadbeat debtors, blending finance with a pinch of voodoo. Money wasn't just business, it was a spiritual soap opera. Banking also had a dark side. It widened the gap between haves and have-nots. In Babylon, big lenders snapped up land from defaulting farmers, turning freeholders into tenants faster than you can say foreclosure. In Rome, publicani tax farming outfits squeezed provinces dry, funneling wealth to the elite while locals starved. These systems didn't just move money, they cemented power, making the rich richer and the poor pawns in a game they couldn't win. Sound familiar? It's the ancient blueprint for too big to fail. One overlooked angle, banking's role in cultural exchange. As trade routes linked Mesopotamia to India, Greece to Persia, and Rome to China, bankers were the grease in the wheels. A Babylonian merchant's letter of credit could buy silk in Susa. A Roman Argentarius could fund a spice run to Alexandria. These transactions didn't just swap goods, they swapped ideas, tech, and even religions. Zoroastrian merchants in Persia funded Buddhist traders in India, indirectly spreading spiritual vibes alongside silver. Banking wasn't just about profit. It was a sneaky catalyst for the ancient world's global glow-up. Let's get meta. Ancient banking also messed with time itself. Loans were bets on the future: plant now, pay later, sale now, profit maybe. This wasn't just practical, it was philosophical. In Egypt, grain loans tied to Nile flood cycles forced farmers to think seasons ahead, planning like time travelers with plowshares. In Rome, long-term loans for aqueducts or temples meant betting on an empire that'd outlive you. Banking didn't just manage money, it stretched human ambition across years, daring people to dream beyond the harvest or the next war. Modern parallels, oh, they're everywhere. Those Babylonian silent partnerships, they're the ancestors of your 401k or that shady hedge fund your cousin swears by. Roman publicani squeezing taxes, meet today's private equity firms gobbling up public services. And the social stigma of debt, it's alive in every side eye you get from maxing out your visa. Ancient banking wasn't perfect. It was gritty, risky, and often brutal. But it taught us that money's more than coins or code. It's a story of trust, power, and the audacity to bet on tomorrow, even when today's looking dicey. So next time you're sweating a late payment or eyeing a shiny new loan, channel your inner Babylonian scribe or Roman Argentarius. They didn't have apps or credit scores, but they built empires on clay, coins, and sheer nerve. Ancient banking wasn't just about numbers, it was about humans daring to borrow against fate, one risky deal at a time. Here's to the hustle that started it all, from ziggurats to Zoom calls, still making the world spin on credit and a prayer. Let's zoom into how ancient banking didn't just move money, it literally built cities. In Mesopotamia, temples weren't just spiritual Wi-Fi hotspots, they were urban planning kingpins. Ziggurats, like those in Ur or Babylon, needed serious cash for construction, and temple bankers made it happen by funneling loans and donations into bricks, labor, and bling. These massive projects weren't just about praising the gods. They turned sleepy villages into bustling hubs, drawing traders, artisans, and snack vendors like moths to a flame. Without temple loans, Babylon might have stayed a dusty pit stop instead of the ancient world's Vegas. Rome took it up a notch. Argentarii financed aqueducts, forums, and bathhouses that screamed, "We're the empire, baby." These weren't just public works. They were real estate flexes that boosted property values and packed cities with people chasing the Roman dream. Need a new market square in Pompeii? Call a banker to fund the marble. Want a shiny amphitheater? Loan it up. Banking didn't just shape economies, it sculpted skylines, proving that even in antiquity, nothing said civil like a good infrastructure loan and a splashy ribbon-cutting ceremony. Now let's get into the headspace of ancient debtors, because owing money wasn't just a balance sheet problem, it was a psychological cage. In Athens, defaulting on a trapezoidal loan could haunt you like a bad Tinder date. You'd dodge creditors in the agora, your stomach churning, knowing one missed payment might cost your farm or your freedom. Babylonian farmers fretted over grain loans, lying awake wondering if the harvest would cover the 20% interest or if they'd end up as temple serfs. This wasn't just stress, it was existential dread, the ancient version of checking your bank app and seeing red. Roman poets like Martial captured this vibe, joking about debtors who'd rather face a lion in the Colosseum than their lender's glare. Debt wasn't just financial, it was a mental shackle, a constant hum of what if I can't pay, that drove some to desperate acts, fleeing town, faking their death, or, in one Greek tale, offering their daughter as collateral. Yikes. Ancient banking didn't just move silver, it weaponized anxiety, turning borrowers into sleepless pawns in a game rigged for the lender's smirk. Speaking of smarts, let's tip our hats to the dawn of financial literacy. Because even ancients knew you needed to read the fine print. In Babylon, scribes taught merchants to track loans and interest on clay tablets, like an ancient Excel crash course. In Greece, wealthy families hired tutors to drill kids on coin weights and contract clauses, ensuring Junior didn't sign away the family vineyard for a bad maritime loan. By Rome's peak, Argentarii offered informal how not to get screwed advice to clients, explaining terms like nominatio or collateral in ways that didn't make eyes glaze over. Now, this wasn't universal. Most peasants were financially illiterate, easy prey for predatory lenders. But it laid the groundwork for a savvier elite. These early lessons weren't about empowerment, they were about survival in a world where one bad deal could tank your dynasty. Today's budget like a boss TikToks owe a nod to those Babylonian scribes scratching out interest tables, proving that knowing your numbers has always been the ultimate flex. Banking didn't just shape wallets, it left its mark on art and literature too. In Mesopotamia, cylinder seals, tiny stone carvings used to sign contracts, were many masterpieces, etched with gods, lions, or loan terms like ancient NFTs. Greek vase painters loved scenes of trapezitai at work, coins stacked high, capturing the agora's financial buzz. Roman satirists like Juvenal roasted greedy bankers, spinning tales of argentarii so rich they bathed in gold dust while debtors starved. These weren't just stories, they were cultural X-rays, showing how money obsessed the ancient mind and inspired everything from epic poetry to snarky graffiti. Let's pivot to the environmental toll, because ancient banking wasn't exactly eco-friendly. In Mesopotamia, loan-driven agriculture pushed farmers to overwork fields, chasing bigger harvests to pay off debts. The result? Salty, exhausted soil that turned fertile plains into dusty wastelands, Babylon's own Dust Bowl. In Rome, publicani funded deforestation to build ships or villas, stripping hills bare and triggering erosion that choked rivers. Banking didn't just fuel growth, it left scars, a reminder that even 4,000 years ago, chasing coin could mean screwing Mother Nature. And oh, the scams. Ancient banking was a con artist's playground. In Athens, shady trapezitai would lose your deposit or fudge coin weights, pocketing the difference. Babylonian lenders sometimes sold fake clay tablets as loan receipts, vanishing before you noticed the contract was as legit as a 3-shekel coin. In Rome, argentarii pulled the "oops, my ledger burned" trick to dodge payouts, leaving clients screaming into the forum void. These hustles weren't just petty theft, they were high art, proving that financial shenanigans are as old as ziggurats and twice as bold. One final twist: banking's role in social mobility, or the lack thereof. In theory, loans could lift you up. A Greek merchant might borrow to fund a trade run, strike it rich, and buy a fancy villa. In practice, the system favored the already loaded. In Babylon, big lenders used defaults to gobble up small farms, turning peasants into tenants. In Rome, elite publicani locked out new players, keeping the wealth in old money hands. For every rags to riches tale, there were a dozen farmers or traders crushed under debt, a stark reminder that ancient banking was less land of opportunity and more stay in your lane, pleb. Modern echoes? They're loud. Ancient over farming? It's today's monoculture, wrecking soil for profit. Financial literacy? Those Greek tutors are the ancestors of your Money 101 YouTube binges. Banking scams? Just swap clay tablets for phishing emails, and it's the same game. And social mobility? The elite rigging the system is as Roman as it is Wall Street. Ancient banking wasn't just about coins, it was about power, dreams, and the eternal hustle to outsmart the system. So next time you're dodging a late fee or eyeing a loan, tip your hat to the scribes, trapezitai, and argentarii who wrote the playbook, clay, coins, and chaos included. Let's kick things off with a spicy take. Ancient banking wasn't just about stacking coins. It was a diplomatic superpower that kept empires from throat-punching each other. In the Achaemenid Persian Empire, royal treasuries and private lenders greased the wheels of peace deals by funneling silver to rival states as gifts or straight-up bribes. Need to keep a Greek city-state from revolting? Toss them a loan to fund their fancy new theater, courtesy of Persopola's finest financiers. These weren't just cash drops. They were financial flexes that screamed, "Play nice," or "we'll buy your neighbor's loyalty instead." In Rome, argentarii played ambassador by proxy, managing tribute payments to allied tribes or funding friendship projects like roads in far-off provinces. This wasn't altruism. Every denarius spent bought a smidge of stability, keeping the empire's borders less stabby. Even in Mesopotamia, temple loans to neighboring city-states doubled as diplomatic IOUs. ensuring trade routes stayed open and nobody got too sword happy. Banking didn't just build wealth, it built bridges, proving that sometimes a well-placed loan was mightier than a legion. Now let's get personal. Ancient banking didn't just shape economies. It shook up family drama like a soap opera on papyrus. In Babylon, loans tied to dowries could make or break a marriage deal. A father borrowing to fund his daughter's dowry might score a high set of groom, but if he defaulted, the bride's family could lose their land and their dignity. In Rome, elite families used loans to cement alliances, lending to in-laws to keep the clan tight. Miss a payment, though, and your cousin's toga party turned into a public feud, with everyone airing dirty laundry in the forum. Greek households felt the squeeze, too. A merchant borrowing for a trade voyage might pawn his family's vineyard, putting his wife and kids on edge, because if the ship sank, they'd be homeless. These financial gambles didn't just risk coin, they risked relationships, turning family dinners into tense debates over, why did you borrow from that shady trapezitai? Banking wasn't just business, it was a domestic pressure cooker, where one bad loan could make you the black sheep of your own bloodline. Let's talk about the birth of financial privacy, because ancients weren't exactly shouting their bank balances from rooftops. In Mesopotamia, temple scribes kept loan records under wraps, sealed in clay envelopes to avoid nosy neighbors spilling your debt tea. In Athens, trapezitai worked out of discreet back rooms, not flashy stalls, to keep clients' deposits hush-hush. Because nothing says rob me like a public ledger. By Rome's heyday, Argentarii used coded raciones to shield VIP clients' transactions, a nod to the elite's obsession with keeping their financial dirt off the gossip mill. This wasn't about ethics, it was about survival. A leaked debt could tank your social cred or invite creditors to your doorstep like ancient debt collectors with togas and grudges. Privacy wasn't a right, it was a privilege, bought with status or bribes. Fast forward, and it's the ancestor of your bank's "we value your privacy" email. Right before they sell your data to a marketing firm, ancient banking taught us that keeping your finances quiet is as old as dirt and twice as strategic. Banking also turned legal disputes into a circus because nothing says ancient drama like a courtroom showdown over a bad loan. In Babylon, default cases clogged courts with scribes waving clay tablets like legal exhibits A through Z. One epic case saw a lender sue for a debtor's entire flock of goats and his sandal collection. Talk about petty. In Athens, debt trials were public spectacles, with orators spinning tales of "he swore he'd pay," while crowds ate it up like reality TV. Roman courts were no slouch either. Publicani lawsuits over tax contracts could drag on for years, with lawyers raking in denarii while everyone else just wanted a refund. These disputes weren't just about money, they were about honor. Losing a case could brand you a deadbeat, while winning made you the local legend who outsmarted the system. Courts didn't just settle debts, they staged moral theater, where banking's winners and losers played out for all to see. It's the ancient root of today's sue the pants off 'em culture, minus the wigs, but with just as much swag. Let's get psychological. Ancient banking fed into the human itch to flaunt wealth, and boy did they lean in. In Rome, senators didn't just lend money, they made sure everyone knew they were lending, parading their coin-heavy status like peacocks with purses. Babylonian lenders built lavish houses next to temples, screaming, "Look at my loan profits." In Greece, trapezitai sponsored chariot races or plays, not out of kindness but to flex their financial muscle. This wasn't subtle, it was a psychological power trip, a way to say, "I've got the silver, so I'm the boss." Sound like a modern CEO's yacht obsession? Yup, same energy, different toga. Finally, let's talk festivals, because ancient banking didn't just stay in the ledger, it partied hard. In Mesopotamia, the Akitu festival wasn't just a New Year's bash. Temples used it to settle debts and issue loans, turning a religious rave into a financial free-for-all. In Athens, the Panathenaic Games saw trapezitai set up stalls, swapping coins and offering quick loans to revelers betting on chariot races. Think Coachella with interest rates. Rome's Saturnalia was a banker's dream, with Argentarii funding feasts or gifts, knowing tipsy elites would repay with extra gratitude and interest. Banking didn't just fund fun, it gate-kept who could afford to join the party. Modern parallels? They're screaming. Persian loan diplomacy? It's today's IMF dangling aid to keep countries in line. Family loan drama? Think holiday fights over who's paying mom's credit card bill. Financial privacy? It's your bank's VPN promise that's more marketing than reality. Courtroom debt battles? They're the DNA of every Judge Judy episode. Wealth flexing? Instagram influencers have nothing on Roman senators. And festival banking? It's the pop-up ATMs at music fests, ready to fleece you at 3% per withdrawal. Ancient banking wasn't just about numbers. It was about power, ego, and the eternal hustle to turn a profit, whether in a temple, a courtroom, or a drunken festival brawl. So raise a glass or a clay tablet to the ancient financiers who turned trust into treasure and debt into drama. From Babylonian scribes to Roman party planners, they didn't just move money, they shaped cities, families, and festivals, all while dodging scams and stroking egos. Next time you're juggling bills or eyeing a loan, remember, you're not alone. You're just the latest player in a 4,000-year-old game where the stakes are high, the drama's higher, and the only rule is to keep hustling.